The Ain't No Fang podcast. From Arizona Sports, Ain't No Fang.
Welcome into Ain't No Fang, Arizona Sports Diamondbacks podcast, coming to you on a Friday. I'm Alex Weiner, joined by Steve Zinsmeister, new father and pre- and post-game show host for the Diamondbacks. Steve, how's everything going?
I sleep a lot less, Alex.
That's good.
I think you probably could have expected that. But no, things have been going really well. I appreciate you having me in.
Absolutely, yeah. No, just really happy for you and your family, and just happy you were able to come in and chat for a few minutes before your pregame show gets going. Diamondbacks in St. Louis against the Cardinals for the Memorial Day weekend. But before that Cardinals series starts, they have reached the 50-game mark, which is a nice whole number for us to take into account and just makes it a little bit easy. So because of that, and because it's Memorial Day weekend, when it's like, you know, it's no longer quote-unquote early. It still kind of is, but at this point, there's a decent sample size. We kind of know what the faults and the positives of each team is. So I figured it was a good time to kind of do a temperature check for the Diamondbacks. So just a quick overview. The Diamondbacks enter this next 50 games at a 26-24 record. It's 2 games better than last year. I think there's reasons to be a little frustrated, a little bit underwhelmed by the first 50 games. I don't think there are a lot of reasons to be panicked about the first 50 games. Just kind of, I know this will sound extremely general. Where are you at with where the Diamondbacks are compared to maybe some expectations that we had coming into the year?
Yeah, I think you framed it pretty well. The way I've been saying it to people is it's not early anymore, but there is still a lot of baseball to be played. I think where I'm at with this team, like you said, they are technically better now than they were this time a year ago, so that's always going to be top of mind for me. Although last year's team went on kind of a magical run in the summer that I'm not going to say that you have to rely upon later in the year. That would certainly not be ideal, but I felt like, you know, if you kind of segment it out into different pieces of this team, the starting rotation has certainly turned a corner since the beginning of the season, although there's still questions around Zach Gallen and why he still has the highest ERA in this rotation. The bullpen has certainly had its questions, although I'm sure we'll talk about Justin Martinez and his return here in this series in St. Louis and what that can provide, and then A.J. Puck down the road and how they go about improving that unit. Offensively, still one of the better offenses in the game of baseball, certainly top 10, at least in runs scored and things like that. So I think it's primarily the same offense you saw a year ago. And defensively, this team hasn't made nearly the amount of errors that they made in the first month in the second month. So I think all those things being said, they're certainly trending in the right direction.
Sure. Went around the clubhouse on Wednesday and just asked, 50 games, what do you think? And just a couple thoughts here, and this is in our story on ArizonaSports.com. Corbin Burns, quote, I think we've seen it in stretches where we've played some really good baseball and then played some not really good baseball. I think if we can put it all together and get things rolling, we could be a pretty scary team. Jalen Beeks, I think we've battled really well. I think we haven't really played as good as we could have. Not saying guys haven't played well. We just haven't put it all together every game. I think there's been so many missed opportunities. I think when we turn it on and get going, we're going to be one of the best teams in the league. So that seems to be, and there's a few others where that seemed to be a sentiment where it's like we haven't quite lifted off, but the pieces are there that when we do, kind of watch out. Now, you mentioned some of the adversity they've faced. They didn't have Ketel Marte for nearly a month. The back end of the bullpen has been an adventure without A.J. Puck and Justin Martinez in there. Sure. Shelby Miller has done a great job of locking down his innings, but depth has been a bit of an issue back there. Getting Justin Martinez back should help that a lot. And then the schedule has been tough. 3 East Coast road trips. They've played, by winning percentage, the toughest schedule in the National League so far this year. When you look at the rest of it, there are going to be some opportunities to go on a run against some lesser teams coming up, right? So, after this 3-game series in St. Louis, they get the Pirates and the Nationals at home. Both can be pesky, especially if you have a Paul Skeens on the mound one game, and, I haven't seen the probables for that series or for Washington yet. But those are series that you would expect to win and potentially start to gain that momentum to get away from the 500 mark that it feels like they're kind of been stuck to really for most of the season. They're 10-10 their last 20, and they are 14-16 in their last 30. So it's just been breaking away from that 500 mark that's been a little bit challenging.
Yeah, you're right. There's a good opportunity here in the upcoming a couple of weeks, let's say. Now, I don't want to look too. I don't want to look too far into the future. Yeah, but I mean, let's be honest. They went through an absolute gauntlet over the last 3 to 4 weeks in their schedule. They faced a lot of the best teams in a very competitive NL West. So All those things being said, and then you throw in a weird Rockies Saturday game where, somehow they're one of the 8 wins that the Rockies have accrued over the course of this season. So, I think, more specifically, like recently, you look at the Dodgers series and maybe a little bit of Colorado at the end there too, where just not doing the timely hitting things that they normally do. Last year, this team led all of Major League Baseball in batting average with runners in scoring position. And then you look over this Dodgers series, I mean, certainly Tuesday's game, the 8th inning, they had first and third. I think it was no outs or maybe 1 out. They don't score. Wednesday's game, they did the same thing twice in the 6th and the 7th inning, first and third, 1 out and 2 outs, I believe, don't score. Even in Monday's game where they played really well and they hit the ball well, Corbin Carroll had a leadoff triple in the 4th inning, didn't score. Right. And so I think they hit 150 with runners in scoring position in that series against LA. And that's why, back to your point, it kind of feels like they can compete with anybody. They're not afraid of any individual starting pitcher. They took down Yoshinobu Yamamoto at Chase Field, but then he gets the better of them on the flip side of that coin. So I don't think that they've done a bad job during that gauntlet. I think that they've proven they can live up to any of their competition. It's just now that the schedule lightens up, you really want to put the pedal to the metal and try to stack some wins.
Yeah, all really good points. And especially I like the point they can compete with everybody, but we just haven't quite seen them put all the pieces together in all these games to win. They could have won that series in Philadelphia had that first game gone differently. Merrill Kelly leaves with the cramping. Bullpen comes in. They throw Jose Castillo in kind of a tough situation, and Kyle Schwarber does what Kyle Schwarber does. And against the Dodgers, they split the first series. It felt like they probably could have taken 3 of those games. They lose the second series, probably could have taken at least 2 of those games. It's one of those things where you think about the first 50 games, and I think there are more memorable losses than there are wins. And I think that also kind of adds to the little bit of the anxiety going around maybe the fan base a little bit in terms of, last year they missed the playoffs by a tiebreaker, and any one of those games in the early part of the season or the late part of the season could have been the culprit. And now this year, there are so many games where it's like, how did you lose that one in Wrigley when you scored 10 runs in an inning? How did you lose to the Braves when Eugenio Suarez hit 4 home runs? And it's like, oh, well, that's the game that we're going to point to at the end of the season. And it was they miss the playoffs by 1 game. But at the same time, I think there's some decent trends going on with this baseball team to where they could be positioned to not have to deal with that at the end of the season, potentially. They gotten through the hardest part of their schedule, and their starting pitching has really turned a corner from the beginning of the season. The first 2 weeks of the season, they had the worst starting pitcher ERA in the major leagues after, going out and spending on Corbin Burns, and the previous offseason going out and getting Eduardo Rodriguez. And I was like, uh-oh, what's going on here? That is mostly turned around. Merrill Kelly's been phenomenal. Corbin Burns has been phenomenal, and Brandon Pfaadt has continued to give them, stability in the middle of that rotation. Zach Gallen, they're still waiting for the consistency there. But from a starting staff, it feels like, and obviously there's the Erod and Ryan Nelson situation going on right now. What is kind of your temperature check on the starting rotation as it stands right now?
Yeah, I still have a lot of questions about where Zach Gallen's at. We're going to find out more about that here today when the series starts in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. But you're right about Merrill Kelly. I was very concerned after his outing in New York where he allowed, I think it was 9 earned runs in that game. And that's so early in the season that you don't know yet if he's going to settle down from there.
Shoulder problem last year, had some cramping stuff, just wasn't able to build up the innings that we're used to seeing from him. So there were questions.
And he couldn't have rebounded from that any better than he did with consistency throughout his outings, but then also too from outing to outing and building momentum, which is a hard thing to do. Corbin Burns has obviously turned into the ace that they paid him to be in free agency. So that really shouldn't be a surprise to any of us. But I do think that the Erod Ryan Nelson thing is going to be kind of interesting. If I'm remembering correctly, his next 2 starts, if he gets 2 starts, would be Washington and Pittsburgh, maybe not necessarily in that order. And like you said earlier, those are 2 opponents that you could see him having a lot of success against. And if that's the case, then there might be a conversation to be had among management of, do we roll with Ryan, who, I mean, you've probably had a lot of the same conversations I did with players in spring training where, I'm talking to Merrill Kelly and he's like, Ryan was our best pitcher last year. Yeah. And to hear that from the guy who's arguably the best pitcher this year, I mean, that's a real endorsement. So I think that Ryan is potentially going to force his way into the conversation in the starting rotation, but then Eduardo Rodriguez, where does he fit into that equation? So that's a conversation for maybe a bit down the road, but that's the one that I've really got my eye on because Erod, it's interesting. I think that his numbers really weren't as bad as they looked in the first couple weeks. He kind of got screwed by his defense a couple of times early on and rebounded really well. And unfortunately, he got hit around the last couple of outings. Maybe that has something to do with the injury that he eventually ended up on the IL with. But we'll see what he looks like when he comes back and what role they decide to give him.
It's fascinating. It's a really interesting situation because it was interesting in preseason, right? Or in spring training, right? Because you have the Jordan Montgomery piece, which unfortunately solved itself in a way that wasn't beneficial for any party, and then you had the Ryan Nelson piece, and you're right, Nelson was their best pitcher really from July on last year. What if he goes out and he throws 6 shutout innings against Pittsburgh, and then has another quality start and pitches really well against Washington?
Well, and
how could you possibly take him out of the rotation? But then what are you going to do with Erod? It's a good problem to have. We've said that a lot over spring training. Oh, this is a good problem. If a good problem actually exists, it's still a problem, and you still have to figure out exactly what you want to do because it's hard for me to not think of him as one of their 5 best starting pitchers.
Right, yeah, and I do wonder where management sits right now because in my mind, if he pitches really well, let's say 2 more really good starts against Pittsburgh and Washington, well, in my mind, that makes it an easy decision to keep him in the starting rotation. Mm-hmm. But the flip side of that is maybe management is looking at it as this is Erod's spot when he comes back from injury, and then Ryan performing well makes that a difficult decision for them. Regardless, they're going to tell you it's a difficult call because it is.
Yeah.
Erod has a proven track record in the major leagues. I mean, this is a guy who goes way back with Torey Lovello to being a teenager in the Boston Red Sox organization. So there's a lot of trust, a lot of equity that's been built up between the two of them. Ryan Nelson has pitched some big moments. Certainly he had a huge game in the World Series a couple of years ago. Then last year he has the summer that we just described. So that's going to be a fascinating conversation once Erod is ready to go.
Absolutely. But I think the biggest question and the biggest kind of like this starting rotation will hit its max is if we can get a little bit more consistency from Zach Gallen, and potentially that starts tonight. Let's go to the bullpen a little bit because that's easily the biggest deficiency on this team. With starting rotation, you mentioned the defense has been significantly better. I think the base running has been much cleaner. I think they're starting to play a little bit more like themselves in a lot of those kind of regards. But a lot of these big losses that we described, you score 10 runs in Wrigley and you have a couple lower leverage relievers because you got a banged up bullpen and they can't get an out. Same thing with like that Braves game where Suarez went off, and same thing in that Dodgers game when they came back from a 5-run deficit and then Kevin Ginkel gets in there for the save in the 9th inning and he has some struggles. Ginkel's been much better lately. That's been one of the positives here, and Justin Martinez getting back is obviously going to add a lot to it. How good do you think this bullpen can get if Martinez is humming, if Ginkel can kind of turn it around, and then you eventually get Puck back into there?
Yeah, I think to your point, there's just been a lacking of options because of the injuries to Puck and Martinez. I mean, those were literally your 2 best options in the bullpen. And, Jalen Beeks has been a godsend. He showed up the day before the season started.
Yeah.
And for the better part of...
Can you imagine if they didn't have him and Shelby Miller?
For the last 3 or 4 weeks, he's been the only reliable left-handed pitcher in their bullpen. I mean, at times they've had Joe Mantiply up and stuff like that, but for the most part, he's had to be that guy for them. And so credit to him. Shelby Miller, like you said, non-roster invitee, and he works his way not only into the major league bullpen, but all the way to the closer's role, which he's done a pretty good job with. I know that things blew up there in the 10th inning against the Dodgers the other day, but I don't entirely blame him for that.
He's still got like a 1.5 ERA.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a really good start to the season, regardless of where he's at numerically. And
218, but yeah, that's
sure,
pretty good.
It's still really, really good. And so, yeah, as they get options back, like Martinez today, like Puck down the road, maybe sometime in late July, that's obviously going to help in a lot of ways to kind of thin out that roster and make it deep in ways that they haven't had so far this year. I still look at this collection of talent in the bullpen, and from the eye test, it still tells me that this is the most talented bullpen the Diamondbacks have had in a long time, regardless of how they're pitching. But there's obvious names in it that need to step up. Ryan Thompson, I mean, I think at one point he gave up 9 earned runs in his last 5 outings, and I mean, that's not going to cut it. And that's a guy who was a huge part of what they did to go to the World Series in 2023. And I'm not saying that he's lost that touch. I think it's still in there somewhere. It's just he's got to tighten some things up. And so, yeah, as a collective unit, I still love this Diamondbacks bullpen from a talent standpoint. It's just execution that they've really struggled with.
Once you get once Martinez takes over that closer spot, if you can get a Martinez and you have your high leverage guys of Ginkel, Beeks, and Miller, you just really at that point you kind of need that depth. Those guys who can keep the 1-run deficit a 1-run deficit, not a 4-run deficit, right?
Let's not forget Graveman too.
That's who
definitely
is
in the mix.
Him,
yeah,
Murillo. We'll see, what kind of moves and who kind of goes up and down when an Erod gets back. What do they do? Who ends up in the bullpen? Can Dre Jameson work his way back at some point? I know he's injured now, but it's not supposed to be a lengthy absence. Can maybe one of those other younger guys who we see in short stints in the major leagues come back and potentially play a role at some points? It feels like they do have some options there. So while since April 18th, the bullpen has a 6.39 ERA, which is one of the worst in Major League Baseball. It doesn't necessarily mean it's hopeless, but you're right. Guys like Ryan Thompson and Kevin Ginkel have to continue to rebound and get better than they have been so far. And while we do that, so we got hit on the starting pitching, we hit on the bullpen, hit a little bit on the hitting, but we can go a little bit further in on that one. It really is just the situational hitting for me because they are top 5 scoring offense. They are top 5 in home runs. They lead the league in doubles. They have a top 5 OPS as a team. You got Corbin Carroll having an all-star season. You've got Geraldo Perdomo having an all-star season. You have so many guys having at least league average or better seasons offensively, and then Gurriel and Moreno have turned things around. It really is the big difference between why last year they led the league in runs and this year they're, still one of the top scoring teams, but not at the top, and why it's felt maybe a little bit less electric is the timely hitting. Coming into the weekend, so the Diamondbacks, they are hitting .231 with runners in scoring position, which is 24th in the league. When there's runners in scoring position and 2 outs, they are hitting .189 as a team, which is pretty bottom tier, especially considering, as you mentioned, they were one of the best teams, if not the best team in the league last year when it came to hitting with runners in scoring position. Anything offensively that stands out to you, good or bad, like as we kind of frame it in, they're producing, it just maybe doesn't feel quite as prominent as last year because there have been some missed opportunities and some meat left on the bone.
Well, if we go down that road you're talking about with runners in scoring position and look at one guy in particular, I think it's kind of encapsulates what's going on with the whole team. Ketel Marte, since he got back from injury at the beginning of this month, he's been good in some ways and kind of not good in others. So, like, for instance, he's got, I think it's 15 hits since he got back from injury at the beginning of the month. 7 of them are home runs. That's great. On the one hand, he's hitting the ball out of the ballpark. The problem is he's hitting, I think, 1 for 16 with runners in scoring position. Now, you could, attest that to the fact that not a lot of guys getting on in front of him or, he hasn't had the opportunities. Overall, I think he's only hitting in like the 230s in terms of batting average since he got back, but there's a lot of power there. So in some ways, they're relying on Ketel Marte. I mean, twice this week even, they've had games where they tried to ride a 1-run lead the whole way to victory. And, of course, they pulled it off on Sunday against the Colorado Rockies, but that's the Rockies. Then they tried to do it against the Dodgers, and, of course, it wasn't enough to outlast L.A. So, of course, this doesn't all fall on the shoulders of Ketel Marte. I'm just using him as one example of a guy who's still doing a lot of Ketel Marte type things. He was 3rd in MVP voting last year. And like you said, they had to stay afloat for a month without their best player. And I think ultimately, by and large, they did that. And Corbin Carroll kind of took off at that point and carried this offense in a lot of ways. So they've done more than just stay afloat. They've had a lot of success offensively when you consider the context of it all. But yeah, you're right. Situationally, that's something that this team prides themselves on. We talked about how they led the league in hitting with runners in scoring position last year. That's how they had the best offense in baseball. And now that they don't have that, they're still good, but they're just not quite able to put it to the same level as a year ago.
Let me give you an example here. So in runs scored this season, put that on there. So obviously the Diamondbacks they dropped to 6 because they didn't play yesterday and then somebody passed them up.
Fair enough.
Whatever. Still top 6 in scoring, and they have fewer games than the 3 teams ahead of them. So they're going to jump back up.
L.A.
It's the Cubs right now are 1, then it's L.A., then it's the Yankees, then it's the Tigers, then the Red Sox, then the Diamondbacks. But the D-backs, unless they get shut out tonight, are going to jump back into the top 5. But be that as it may, they are 6th. The Giants are 10th in runs scored. In team OPS, the Diamondbacks are 3rd at 782. The Giants are down at 19th at 699. Batting average, it's kind of a similar thing. The Diamondbacks are, there we go. The Diamondbacks are toward the top of the league at 254. The Giants are towards the bottom of the league, down at 235. The biggest difference is that the Giants are absolutely maximizing their opportunities with runners in scoring position, while the Diamondbacks are kind of, again, as I mentioned, leaving a lot on the bone. The Giants are 4th in the league in average with runners in scoring position. When you look at sustainability throughout a season, like which offense would you take throughout the entire year, just based on the talent, the thump, and kind of the opportunities they are creating, that's where I'd argue you'd still rather be in the Diamondbacks, kind of shoes, because the potential is so much higher than in the Giants' shoes, where they just don't have quite the same thump, but they are taking advantage of their opportunities when they get them now.
It's just frustrating, right? Because
it makes it seem so much worse.
It's the more maddening version of baseball to watch when your team is building innings but not finishing them. I compared it on
a lot of homers, but not getting that sacrifice fly with the runner on third base,
right?
And 1 out. It doesn't feel like what they have been the last few years, because it hasn't been.
Right. On the postgame show the other day, I compared it to building a house, and you build the walls, you put in the front door, you've got the foundation, and then you don't put a roof on it. It's like, it's just not done. I mean, and this is maybe more specific to the last series in LA and the last 2 games in particular, where you feel like you did everything you had to do to win the game, and somehow you didn't.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt in those last 2 games in LA. Certainly the 14-12 game on Saturday against Colorado felt like that, where like you should have had it. You scored 12 runs, but you didn't win the game. Mm-hmm. And like you said earlier, there's more instances of that throughout the season where you can point to something that went wrong rather than moments where you can point to something that went right. And that's frustrating, even for a team that has, a net positive season right now, like the Diamondbacks do. They're 26-24, better than they were a year ago. And yet we still have things to complain about. And sometimes you just got to put that in perspective. I'm not overly worried about a lot of that, but the runners in scoring position stuff, I mean, that's like 1A on the list of things that you should be at least looking at right now with the Diamondbacks.
Okay, rapid fire. 50 games in, who's your team MVP so far?
Hard to argue with Corbin Carroll and what he was able to accomplish with Ketel out. So I definitely put him up there. Corbin Burns and Merrill Kelly also have a really good argument.
I would also throw Geraldo Perdomo in there.
I'd
probably go with Corbin Carroll, but I think that you can make a case for Perdomo.
Statistically, he's the best shortstop in the game right now.
He's putting himself on an all-star track, and if he continues that, I hope he gets there.
Yeah, me too.
Cy Young of the year so far, Cy Young of the first 50 games.
Around the league?
No, for the Diamondbacks.
Oh, just the Diamondbacks.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd still probably have to go with Corbin Burns, but I think what Merrill Kelly's put together is really fascinating, especially when you consider there's been a couple outings where he's still dealt with the cramping stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I'll say Merrill Kelly, considering the context.
Okay. I would tend to agree, although I think Corbin Burns, it's like incredibly tight between those two. And then one surprise this year, a player specifically who has maybe been better than you would have thought coming into the season.
Well, I mean, if it's the general fan, I mean, Shelby Miller's got to be up at the top of the list, just when you consider... again, the context in the story is that, this is one of the most hated players in franchise history because of the trade that they made years ago to get him, and then things fell apart. So the redemption arc for him has been fascinating to watch. So maybe it's Shelby Miller. Maybe it's Jalen Beeks, who literally his second conversation with his manager ever was on the mound, being taken out of the game. So maybe it's one of those two guys who are the biggest surprises for me. Those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with both of those. I think Shelby Miller is on the short list of kind of the coolest baseball stories we've had in Major League Baseball this season. So, with that, we will leave you with 50 games. There's been plenty to be frustrated by. As I mentioned, there's been plenty to be hopeful with. Fangraphs gives them a 50.5% chance to make the postseason. Baseball Prospectus has them at 53.9%. They are 5 games back of the Dodgers for the division. They are 2 games back of the final wild card spot. They're still right there, even with everything that has happened this season. And the last note is if they were 4-0 in games they scored 11 runs in instead of 1-3, they'd be 29-21. And I think the fan base would feel quite a bit better about the first 50 games than they do now. But still, with that, there's a lot of baseball to be played, and they are still in a pretty decent position to go on a run. But they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to go on that run here when they have the opportunity for it. But Steve, thanks so much for taking a few minutes right before you're about to go on and continue talking. So get some water, some tea, some whatever you do to keep it fresh.
Do we have a recording of this? Can I just play it back from my pregame show? Or?
Honestly, you probably could. All right. Anyway, happy Memorial Day weekend. Diamondbacks 3 against the Cardinals before they return home, 3 against the Pirates, 3 against the Washington Nationals, and then head back on the road. So thanks so much for watching and listening to Ain't No Fang, Arizona Sports Diamondbacks podcast. Keep it locked in Arizona Sports for all things D-backs baseball. Thanks so much.